My name is Sikholars, and my research interests are in medical and psychological anthropology. What I was interested in studying was the healing phenomenon through the use of Bani and Simran. And within this process, I kind of stumbled upon this mission, which is located in Chandigarh, by the name of Sarab Rog, Aukhad Naam. This name basically comes from a line in Sikholars, which means all rogues, all illnesses can be healed by the use of Naam, by the use of names, by the use of God's name. And so when I traveled to Chandigarh, I actually found out that this place is not necessarily a gurdwara. They actually use a local public school in Sector 42, and they actually have this room that they rent out every single day for a period of 2 hours a day. And this local Sangat comes, they have these people who are sick that they come there. You know, they can suffer from these various diseases of mind and of body. And they do these shabbats that have been selectively taken from Bani that deal with this idea of acquiring faith in God, in God's name, and the power of Vaigu to heal. And for a process of 3 hours a day, they're supposed to do this Bani and to meditate on its meaning. And so they collectively come and do this together and then go over its meaning. And basically what I found out by going to Chandigarh was that this process is a universal healing methodology. It can cure all illnesses, those of the mind, the body, and that of the ego. And this technique, which they called is Aukhad Naam, or as they translated it in English, name medicine. So what is this process of name medicine? Basically, to understand this, we must first understand what it is the conception of self is within Sikhi. So as all of us here kind of understand this mind-body dichotomy that exists, but within Sikhi, that's not necessarily what the true self is. The true self within Sikhi is quite different. It's this idea of Jot Swarup, the embodiment of the divine that exists within us. So what we must do as Sikhs, and as all individuals, all people, because Sikhi is not a religion that's only for people who practicing Sikh, it's kind of this universality that goes with it, is that you must understand this idea by doing Simran, by doing contemplative meditative techniques, to understand this idea that God resides within you, and by practicing these techniques of understanding Bani and understanding these mantras of understanding God, and to understand within the depths of your mind, of the unconscious mind where God exists, and kind of, represent that God exists within you. And this is the ability to kind of heal a disease and understand the self. And this kind of allows us to talk about what illness and healing can mean within a Sikh perspective. So illnesses basically come from this idea that because our true self is this jewel, it kind of goes beyond our present trajectory in the world. It kind of exists within previous reincarnations. And because of this, we have this idea that, everything in life is predestined, including this idea of illness. So if you've committed some sins in previous lives, an illness can be one way that, you have to atone for it. So that is one way that illness can be looked at within the process of Sikhi. So therefore, healing within Sikhi perspective can be seen as, first of all, having to accept that not everything is within one's own control. There is this greater entity that exists, and this entity, God, is in control of our own lives. We ourselves are not in control of our own lives. But we must do something about it to kind of eradicate our past misdeeds and our past sins. And one way to do this, to eradicate our past karmas, which is this idea of karma, is to do this contemplative meditative techniques. And this can be done through the understanding of Bani, any type of Bani. But what this mission basically does is it takes these 7 selected shabbats, which actually come from the Panjani Sahib, but which in itself is a compilation of shabbats that have to do with illness and healing and like how God can eradicate all illnesses. And this basic idea comes from a really cardinal belief in Sikhi that, Bani in and of itself is a Shabbat Guru. It is a written manifestation of God, that it came directly, the words written in Guru Bani came directly from God. That Turki Bani, that the words derived from the primal Lord, that it came to eradicate all anxiety. For a long period of time within the medical and pathological discourse. Illness was basically like this theory of therapeutic process was basically divided into different categories that kind of overlap. So Shortest in Climate basically said that, this is not really doing much. Like, it's not a good way to kind of define this healing process. It basically said that instead of focusing on the act or the performance of healing, what you should do is you should talk about this idea of how healing is mediated through. And they also said that, traditionally, when medical anthropologists looked at the healing phenomenon, they used to look at what the healer was doing. Instead, they said, you should look at a patient perspective. So taking this into consideration, when I went into the field, of course, my methodologies included the bread and butter of anthropology, which is an observation, where you immerse yourself in the culture of what's going on, you practice it as well as observe. But I use this technique, which is known as person-centered ethnography. It's where you focus on the individual experience of a person. It's you look at the person as the individual as a locus of experience, not as the phenomenon itself. So I basically went and I took people, and I took illness narratives of people, and took their life histories, and from this idea, I kind of understood what was going on within the process and how they defined what illness and healing was within this process. And from this process of taking these techniques, I found out that there were three main types of efficacy that can be seen within this phenomenon going on at the mission. The first form of efficacy that I was able to see was this idea of the foregrounding of the religious ideology of God residing within the individual, and the fact that the body itself has the manifestation of having these powers within the word, which is the technique that the institution is preaching. This idea that Sikhi is teaching within the institution. The second is the acquisition of faith through individual experiences of repeating these shabads with their meaning over time as a process of interpreted drift. So here I'm actually relying on Tanya Luhrmann's theory of interpreted drift, which is the slow, often unacknowledged shift in someone's manner of interpreting events as they become involved in a particular activity. So this is basically can be an unconscious process, but as you continuously repeat these shabads and understand their meanings and it becomes ingrained in your mind, you actually start changing your attitude and the way you look at events. So, for example, if this is one of the shabads that the mission kind of says to do and to repeat with its meaning, Ek aas rakho man mein, Sarab Rog Nanak Nikshay, which means, keep faith in one, O my mind, says Nanak, all ailments will disappear. So if you're doing these type of shabads, this kind of shows the definite ability of God to heal all ailments. When everything else is going to fail, this methodology will not fail. You kind of start showing a change in one's attitude and one's worldview. And this was definitely noticeable when I was doing within my case studies. So as I mentioned earlier, I basically looked at the individual as a locus of experience. And so I had three distinct case studies. One was SK, who suffered from anxiety and depression. Then DK, she suffered from Parkinson's disease. GR suffered from thyroid and arthritis. And all three of these were women who were local attendants at the mission. They came from very expensive times, ranging from 2 years to 5 years. And they had various age limits. One person ranged from 30 to about 70 years old. And they had various economic backgrounds. But within these illness narratives, I found out that there's something that I term as a self-transformative healing. That there is a transformation through the decentralization of the ego. There's a change in one's worldview, going from an egocentric to a more God-centric worldview that's going on through this process of changing and repetition of these shabads with the meaning. And it's not necessarily a conscious process. So as they were saying, at first I used to do this. Okay, and then next I would go and I would do this process. And so the way they were changing their methodology, I would see that this is what's going on. So this is self-transformative healing. The third form of efficacy that I can see is this communal perpetuation of the social mechanisms of bringing cultural ideological assessments of efficacy into contact with personal experience. And this, I argue, is almost the central glue that brings everything together. This is the Sangat. That when everyone would come, would kind of form these familial groups, and like they would start knowing everything about each other, and they would help provide this positive feedback mechanism. So the Sangat that came was very variable. On a day-to-day basis, it could be from 10 people to 30 people, and they range from every type of background, even different religious backgrounds. But they all form this type of community, and they would help reinforce the ability of this methodology to heal. One example was this Hindu family that was there, and they had this little girl who suffered from a wheat allergy. And within a process of only 10 days, she was healed. And she herself was not completing this process. It was her family that was doing it for her. So I was able to see within my interviews that GR says, the Hindu family that comes here, the one that healed their daughter's wheat allergy in a week's time, came here to do Shabbads, hymns, with an open mind. And that is why they were healed. The religion of a person doesn't matter. It's the faith they have in God that does. Similarly, DK also reiterates this fact. The healing process is dependent on the individual, not on their religious belief system. The Hindu child, a non-Sikh, was healed of her illness, as was her brother after continuing with the practices at home. Their family did the Bach one by one in their homes, and because they did it with such faith and reverence, the kids were healed. So her brother actually suffered from asthma as well, and so they continued this at home after discontinuing and coming to the mission, and he was also healed similarly. So because they were a Hindu family and all this, it kind of reiterated this fact at home, and it helped them have more faith in this process. So in conclusion, what can we get from this research? We can see like it's definitely a self-transformative process that's going on. It's this idea of a decentralization of the ego from this idea of ego-centric to a more God-centric worldview. The Sangat can serve as a positive reinforcement mechanism. And because this idea of faith is not a one-time process, it's this continual process that goes on that you have to make the bonding more tangible. So you have to understand its meaning. And once you understand the meaning, that's the only way that corporate realities can be changed. You can see a healing process actually occur. So,